Thunder!
Hey everybody, how's it going? Multiversus is finally back. Feels like I've been waiting a pretty long time for this game to come back. Now, I get it, the open beta servers only shut down, a little over a year ago, but it feels like it's been even longer than that just because I stopped playing around the time when Marvin the Martian was added back in November of 2022, so it's felt like a bit more time has passed. And I've just been hoping and waiting that this relaunch was gonna be worth the wait. And so far, yeah, the team at Player First Games has been proving that, yeah, this is a big moment for the game. I mean, PvE mode looks cool. They moved the game over to Unreal 5, which is sure to bring a multitude of improvements. And then we got the announcement of a bunch of new characters. We got Banana Card from Adventure Time, who I know people have been saying it's a joke character, but I like Adventure Time, so I'm not complaining. Then we got the Joker, who was teased to be added to the game before the game shut down its open beta. And then we got two kind of surprising characters that I did not expect. Jason Voorhees and Agent Smith from The Matrix. Now, these characters, I love both of these characters. I'm excited to try out Jason at the relaunch, but these two characters really show me that WB is saying, all right, nothing's off the table, because these are two characters that they make sense, but I would not have expected them to get added to the roster, especially this soon. So that really gets me excited for the future of this game. And of course, with that excitement, there comes the desire to speculate. Now, I know we've been through this all before with Super Smash Bros. And Nick All-Stars, but whenever I see a big game like this with so much crossover potential, my mind just starts racing with so many ideas of who could join this fight, because now that we've got a character like Jason in the roster, I really feel like the sky's the limit for who they could put in this game. So let's just talk about who could get added to the roster. I have a lot of ideas. Now, I should touch on the characters that did get teased in the trailer for the relaunch first. Now, I'm not going to be talking about any data mined characters or anything like that, just characters that were teased directly in the teaser itself. So the prominent leaker on Twitter, Multiversus Susie, actually put out a tweet compiling all the references that she noticed in the trailer. We've got Samurai Jack's katana, Aquaman's trident, Raven's pentagram symbol, the Wicked Witch from Wizard of Oz, her broom, Bubbles plush, Dexter's glasses, Green Lantern's power battery, Marceline's guitar, Scooby Snacks, Daffy Duck's duck season poster, and potentially the Animaniacs with their rocket and, of course, the Warner Brothers water tower. Now, these are already a ton of characters that are potentially joining the roster in the future, and they're all characters that I thought were going to join Multiversus at one point or another, and yet, despite all these characters being teased, there are still so many more characters from all of Warner Brothers IP that I want to see join the game. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm not gonna make like a top 10 list of definitive characters that I want in the game. Rather, I want to break down the three major categories that these characters can come from and delve into each one. So when I say categories, I'm talking about live action movies and TV, video games, and all of Warner Brothers animation. So Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, Hanna-Barbera, Looney Tunes, you get the idea. And I am going to be avoiding talking about characters that already have their series represented in Multiversus. So I'm not going to be talking about, like, say, Pearl from Steven Universe or maybe Ice King from Adventure Time. I'm going to try and stick completely to wholly original characters joining the roster. Let's get started with our first big category, live action movies and TV. Starting with movies, one movie in particular, or one movie franchise in particular that I thought was going to be here on the relaunch is Mad Max, especially with Furiosa just coming out. Mad Max is such a cool and just over-the-top franchise that I thought it would have fit perfectly if we would have added Max or even Furiosa, maybe even a Morton Joe from Fury Road. There's so much potential of what could be added if this series was to join Multiversus. I mean, plenty to pull from in terms of movesets, but also just what a cool stage the Mad Max universe would make for a game like this. I think that out of all of the big movie franchises that WB owns, I feel like this one is coming at some point down the line. I could be wrong, but I feel like it would be a missed opportunity not to put Mad Max into Multiversus. Next up is another movie franchise that I am shocked wasn't even in Multiversus from the beginning, and that's the Monsterverse. So specifically Godzilla, and King Kong. I know that it's sort of co-owned by Legendary, Warner Brothers, and Toho, but this series has proven to be really a big blockbuster success for Warner Brothers. I mean, we've already gotten a bunch of Godzilla movies, and we have a third Godzilla and Kong crossover movie that's greenlit. So Warner Brothers definitely believes that this series has a future. And I mean, look at just Godzilla on his own. This is a character with such a rich history in pop culture that I feel like you'd want a character like this in Multiversus. I can understand not wanting to get Kong into the series because King Kong's rights are tied up a little bit with Universal to an extent in terms of movie rights, so he might be a little bit trickier to get into the game. But Godzilla, he's crossed over with multiple games already. Fall Guys, Giga Bash, he even came to Dave the Diver apparently, so like, I don't think that having Godzilla joining Multiversus would be a problem. And besides, it would be a great excuse to use that whole size class that they introduced with Iron Giant, because right now Iron Giant is the only character of that size in the game. So it makes sense for them to add another character that can basically act as a direct counter to Iron Giant. Honestly, I don't even care what he would play like. I just really love Godzilla and I'd love to see him join the game. I will say one more thing about Kong though before I move on. If he does end up getting into the roster somehow, I need a move where he takes Zuko and just whips him around and beats people with him. I need that in the game. Now that we have Jason Voorhees in the roster, I just keep thinking about how many more horror reps they could have joining the roster. And of course, you've got characters like Freddy Krueger, Pennywise, potentially even like Chucky maybe. But I was trying to think of any upcoming horror movies, like big movies that Warner Brothers could use for cross promotion with Multiversus, and I thought of a big one, the Beetlejuice sequel. Beetlejuice is a character that was rumored all the way back in the beta, and I was kind of shocked when he wasn't added like around Halloween when the game was still in open beta. So now would be the perfect time to add him with the movie coming out later this year. There's so much that you could pull from in terms of just references. You can pull from the movie, the musical, the cartoon. And that brings up another point. Beetlejuice, even in live action, is pretty much a living cartoon character. He's so over the top and zany, has all these weird and wacky powers, and I just think that he would fit perfectly onto the cast of fighters. And that really is all I have to say about movie representation. I mean, of course, there are plenty of other movies that deserve representation in Multiverses, like Wizard of Oz, Dune, Barbie even, but these were just the immediate characters that I personally want, so I figured that I mentioned them first and foremost. I mean, that's kind of where we're at with this. It's like there are so many characters to choose from, and just because I don't list a certain character doesn't mean that I don't want them to join the roster, but it's just there are characters that I want more than others. So before we move on to the next category, I do want to touch on live action TV because that's a weird one. I'm sure they could make it work, like maybe you put the entire cast of Friends in, maybe you put Charlie from 2.5 Men in. I don't know. I mean, the only one that I can realistically think of just as a joke and like out of left field pick is Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory. Now, I know that sounds insane, but the immediate thought that came to my mind was him having a move where he just shouts Bazinga, kind of like how Phoenix Wright shouts objection in Marvel vs. Capcom, and maybe it like stun locks an opponent or something. But yeah, I really don't have much to say on the live action TV front of things, so let's just move on to the next category. Oh boy, time to talk about video game reps. Now, Warner Brothers doesn't own a ton of video game studios, but they do own some pretty notable franchises. The first major one that I need to address is Mortal Kombat. Warner Brothers owns NetherRealm Studios, so having a character like Scorpion or Sub-Zero feels like a no-brainer. Like, I was expecting Scorpion to be on the base roster when the game first came out, and you could argue, oh, Mortal Kombat's too violent, oh, they'll never put that in Multiverses. They have Jason Voorhees on the roster. And Jason was in Mortal Kombat, so I think that they can make a character from that game work in Multiverses. And besides, with another Mortal Kombat movie, on the horizon too, Warner Brothers is definitely going to want to keep promoting this series. Not to mention, Ed Boon, the creator of Mortal Kombat, keeps tweeting out about Multiversus. Now, I know it's just him as a developer supporting his fellow developers that work under Warner Brothers games, but I would not be shocked if he really wants one of his characters to join the roster. I mean, people were joking for a long time about putting Shaggy in as a Mortal Kombat character because of all the Ultra Instinct Shaggy jokes, so maybe if we actually get Scorpion or Sub-Zero into Multiversus, that joke can come full circle. The other big video game franchise that I want to talk about that WB owns is Scribblenauts. I mentioned the potential of Maxwell joining Multiversus in an earlier video that I did a couple years back, but I still really want him in the game. I think that he would be a perfect fit, and Maxwell has actually been a character that people have speculated would get into Smash for a long time, so if Nintendo doesn't want him in Smash, I mean, putting him in the next best thing could make a lot of people really happy, and besides, Maxwell has a lot of moveset potential. I said in an earlier video that he could act as sort of an RNG character similar to like how Hero does with his spells in Super Smash Bros., but I'm thinking even bigger than that. I mean, Maxwell could be that fourth wall breaking sort of meta character by being able to reference and summon in a bunch of other Warner Brothers items and characters, maybe even IP that haven't been represented in the game yet. Either way, I just have a ton of nostalgia for Scribblenauts, and I just think that it would be wasted opportunity not to put some of Warner Brothers' prominent video game characters into their big crossover video game. It just makes sense to have these characters in there. All right, time for the big category. Animation. This is the category where I have the most characters that I want to join the game. I'm not going to talk about all these characters because we'd be here all day, but I just want to list at least a few of them from each of the major categories. So let's start with Hanna-Barbera. Hanna-Barbera is sort of the genesis of Warner Brothers animation alongside like stuff like Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, so I think it definitely deserves more representation in the roster. Now, we've already got Tom and Jerry, but Tom and Jerry is sort of half Hanna-Barbera, half MGM, so it's a little bit of a gray area. And yes, I know we already have Scooby-Doo representation in Multiversus, but Scooby-Doo has been such a long-running franchise that just felt inevitable. Like, that feels like you have to have Scooby-Doo in any major Warner Brothers crossover project. I want older characters from Hanna-Barbera, characters like Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, Fred Flintstone, George Jetson, Top Cat. This is such a big category that is so important to modern Warner Brothers animation and Cartoon Network that I think you have to include more Hanna-Barbera characters in the roster. All right, so we're going into the next section, but the first character that I want to talk about from this section is a character that sort of overlaps into Hanna-Barbera. We're moving into Adult Swim, and the character that I want to talk about first is Space Ghost, because Space Ghost was, of course, originally a Hanna-Barbera character in the 60s, but then he moved on to being the host of his own talk show that became the first cartoon on Adult Swim, Space Ghost Coast to Coast. This show was so important to Adult Swim's inception and its legacy as a whole, so I feel like you have to include Space Ghost in the roster on Multiversus if you really, really want to show love to Adult Swim. Now, I don't think that Space Ghost would only pull moves from his Adult Swim variant. Of course, you could have him pulling his actual superpowers for a moveset from the original Space Ghost 60s cartoon, but I think you absolutely have to include references to his Coast to Coast version. Honestly, I could even see, even if we don't get Space Ghost as a character, I could see Space Ghost or Brak coming into Multiversus as announcer packs. I feel like that would be super fitting for the characters. Now, while Adult Swim has plenty of other characters that I would love to see join, characters from the Boondocks, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Children's Hospital maybe even put Eric Andre as a real-life person. I don't know. We got LeBron James, so I mean, Eric Andre could join the roster. That'd be insane. But since we talked about Adult Swim's inception with Space Ghost Coast to Coast, I wanted to talk about the other side of that spectrum, talking about a character from modern Adult Swim. I think that we're going to get a rep from Smiling Friends. I really do think that it's inevitable. This show has reached like Rick and Morty levels of virality on the internet. Now, I'm going to address the elephant in the room right away. I do not think that we are going to get Gwimbly as a character in Multiversus. Now, I will admit, when I did first see the episode and I saw that Gwimbly was in a Smash Brothers clone, my initial reaction was, oh my god, Gwimbly's in a Smash Brothers clone, he's going to be in Multiversus and he's going to do his iconic victory dancing out, ew, ew, ew. I don't want Gwimbly in Multiversus. Like, the joke was funny for like the first week when the episode came out, but if they were going to add him to the game, I feel like it would come too little too late, and it would really feel like the joke had been beaten to death at this point. So instead, I want to go with a more chaotic character for Smiling Friends. And it's not Charlie and Pim, it's not Alan, it's not Mr. Boss, it's not Gleb, because I really couldn't think of movesets for those guys that would really fit into Multiverses. So I picked Mr. Frog. Now this character is chaos incarnate. He beats people with hammers, tries to eat people, dumps toxic waste in rivers, and that's exactly why I want him in Multiverses. He is that perfect blend of pure chaos that I think would fit perfectly into a game like this. Now, I could be wrong, and we could get Charlie or Pim or Mr. Boss added to the roster, but I don't think that we're gonna go for like another year without getting at least some form of Smiling Friends representation. Even if it's an announcer pack, an icon, a banner, just something. But if I was going to bet money on it, I really do think that we are going to get a Smiling Friends character at some point. All right, moving on to our final big category, Cartoon Network. This is the category that I think has the most potential for characters to join the roster. Now, of course, there are so many Cartoon Network series and so many characters to choose from, so I'm not going to be able to mention all of them here. So if I don't mention a character that you want, don't think that that means that I don't want them. It's more so I'm just focusing on the characters that I want to join the roster personally more than others. So yeah, just know that I don't mean any ill will against any other Cartoon Network series. These are just my personal picks. So supposedly we're going to have the early 2000s of Cartoon Network represented with Dexter's Lab, Powerpuff Girls, Samurai Jack, right? And then we've got the 2010s represented with Adventure Time and Steven Universe. But there are still a few eras of Cartoon Network that I really want to see represented in Multiverses. Those two eras are the mid to late 2000s and the late 2010s into 2020s. So for the mid 2000s, we have Chowder, we have Codename Kids Next Door, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, but the character that I want to see join the roster the most, and this is potentially one of my most wanted characters in the game, period, Ben Tennyson from Ben 10. This is one of those characters that was everywhere in the mid 2000s. Like, if there was a kid who is from like ages 7 to 13 or 14, they were probably obsessed with Ben 10 if they watched the show. I mean, I was one of those kids. I owned so much Ben 10 merchandise. I watched every episode, and it was kind of my real first introduction to the idea of a serialized cartoon. Now, Ben 10 was still mostly episodic, but it was amplified even more when we got into Alien Force and Ultimate Alien, Omniverse. There was this overarching plot, and it was higher stakes, and it really felt like Cartoon Network's attempt at an original superhero that could stand toe-to-toe with the likes of Spider-Man and Superman and Batman. Like, I would be willing to bet that there was a time in the 2000s where Ben 10 was the biggest superhero in pop culture. That's how important this show was to Cartoon Network, and I don't think that Warner Brothers has leveraged this IP nearly enough. I'm being completely honest here when I say if we were only going to get one more Cartoon Network rep added to Multiverses, one, for the rest of the game's lifespan, I would pick Ben 10 over anyone else. If we were only going to get one more character, Ben 10, absolutely. And yet, despite what I just said, there is still one character that I want to join the game more than Ben, but I think that his chances are a little bit slimmer. My most wanted character for Multiverses is KO from OK KO Let's Be Heroes. This show is probably my favorite modern Cartoon Network cartoon, and honestly one of my favorite cartoons of all time. I mean, yeah, I love Adventure Time, I love Steven Universe, love Ben 10, but there was just something so special about this show, and it was just this perfect homage to nerd culture like video games and shonen anime. It felt like a love letter to 90s and early 2000s kids, and that's probably why I love it so much. This show was treated so poorly by Warner Brothers, and that's why why I wanted to get a second chance through Multiversus. And besides, KO feels like he is tailor-made for a game like this. He already fights like a video game character with abilities referencing plenty of shonen anime, fighting games, beat 'em ups, just 90s culture in general. And joining Multiversus would be far from KO's first experience with crossovers too. He's crossed over with Captain Planet, he crossed over with Sonic the Hedgehog and even learned a few moves from him along the way, and he even crossed over with other Cartoon Network characters in the big event crossover Nexus, where he met Garnet from Steven Universe, Raven from Teen Titans, and Ben from Ben 10. So I feel like him joining Multiversus just feels like something that he's earned at this point. Now I know, KO probably isn't even on the radar for a lot of people when they're talking about characters that they want to join the game, and I do think that there are other characters who deserve to join the roster first, but if this relaunch proves to be successful and if Multiversus gets to live for years to come, and assuming that Warner Brothers doesn't pull a Warner Brothers on the game, I really want to see KO join the roster. He's my most wanted character, and honestly, it feels like the equivalent of me wanting Gino in Smash at this point. Like one of those pipe dream characters that I know will never get in, but I'm gonna keep hoping for him regardless. And that about does it for me talking about all the characters that I want to see join the Multiversus roster. I am so excited for this relaunch, and I really hope that this game ends up being successful because I want to see the lengths that they go to in getting some of these big characters into the game. I feel like the sky's the limit. I mean, we haven't even talked about the possibility of more third-party characters getting added. I mean, Jason is pretty much the closest that we've gotten so far, so I'm excited to see where they go from here. And I'm sure that you have your own thoughts on characters that you want to see in the game as well, so leave your comments down below. I'd love to see what you guys think. But for now, I think that's enough out of me. So if you guys like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Later.